Using a grid is a great way to transfer an image from your photo reference to a drawing. It'll help so that way everything is in correct proportion and where it needs to be on the page, but also it's an easy way to either enlarge or shrink images as well. First, you have to have your image with the grid on top, so that way you know how big your grid is that you will need on your paper. I have a 7x9 grid on this paper, and that can be any measurement. I can do these boxes 1 inch by 1 inch and make it a 7 inch by 9 inch drawing. I can do them at the 1/2 inch to make it a little bit smaller. It just depends on how big my paper is and how big I want my drawing to be. You also can label it with letters and numbers, so that way whenever you go to reference the photo later and reference that to your drawing, you know that you're working in the exact spot that you need. The first thing is to create the grid. I have a much larger paper than I need, and I'm going to give myself a little extra room so that way I have space to label. For this, I don't necessarily need to measure, but I do want to make sure that the edge of my ruler is flush with the edge of my piece of paper. So that way I know that this is a straight line all the way across. I'm starting my grid a little bit in from the edge of the paper, so that way I have a border. But I need 9 squares, and I'm going to make those marks every 1/2 inch. So this is how big that drawing is going to be. Now I need to make sure for the vertical lines, that's lined up to the top of the paper, and that's going to be every 1/2 inch as well. But I'm going to go ahead and draw my line first, and then move my ruler to make those marks every 1/2 inch. And I only need 7 boxes down this way. For the bottom, I need to make sure again that the ruler is lined up to the edge of the paper and that it's lined up to this bottom mark here. And then make my marks again at every 1/2 inch. Again, it's best to line the end of your ruler up to the end of your paper. And this is the size that my drawing will be. I do need to mark every 1/2 inch, making sure to line up the edge of my ruler to that line there. Once I've marked out everything at 1/2 inch on all 4 sides of my page, then I need to draw in my horizontal and vertical lines for the grid. Make sure that you line all those marks up very well so that your grid is even. My grid ended up being a little bit smaller than the image, which is fine because the grid is going to help to make it correct no matter what size it is. I do, however, want to have my labeling the same on the top and the side as I do on my photo. So I'm going to go ahead. Now what I'll be doing is referencing my photograph over to my image. And if I look here, A1, as far as the drawing goes, there's a little bit of difference in the value there, and it looks a little modeled, but there's no drawing there in A1. So I'm going to move over to B1. And if I look here, this shell starts at about halfway. So what I can do is give myself a little bit of a mark there, and that will help me to know where to start. This comes up and goes over to the right, not quite halfway, but a little bit below. So I'll give myself something to aim for right there as well. So as my eye traces up, that's how my pencil needs to move. So this goes up, and it curves and angles up a little bit and over to where that mark is that I made earlier. In C, I have a line mostly that just goes over and then down, up and down again. So starting where I ended off, I'm going to go over, angle down and to the right a little, angle up and to the right, and then a little down cut right before that line for the next box. The next one here, it goes down, it has a little bit of a bump in the middle, and then comes up to the right. So here it's going to go down, have a bump in the middle, and go up and to the right. So I'm just going to keep repeating this process until I get all the way across and move down to the next row. And then there's nothing in H and I, so I can move on down to the next row again. Nothing in A2, so here's B2, and I know that it starts here and goes down to like just about there, a little bit further in. So this goes in and then out, and it angles in and meets right there. There's also another line that kind of comes up here, so I'm going to have that come up there as well. That line continues up into C. And then here there's another section there that starts pretty much in the corner, goes up all the way, and then comes down. Got another that comes and meets up here. So all I'm doing is looking for these sections and where they meet and where those lines go. And a lot of this is mostly just pattern on the shell. So if I wanted to, I could always go back and do that later. Okay, so I'll go through and do that pattern later. So let's get the end of this shell here. It comes out, there's a little bump, and then it comes down, and it ends right about here and starts to come back. So you can do it one side to the other, or you can just follow one line all the way. So if you do jump around, you need to make sure, if I wanted to start here where this back leg is, I need to make sure that I'm in 4B. Then I go here to 4B.
I've gone ahead and sped the video up, but you just repeat that process throughout the rest of the drawing stage. You're making sure to look at where those lines move, in what direction, where do they curve and turn and intersect with the grid. That helps you to really plot out where that drawing is. Once you're done with the drawing, then you get on to the shading. It's really good to have, especially here with this black and white photo, I want to have my value chart right next to me. So that way I can compare what values are in the image at each spot. So is something a 75% value or a 50 or a 100%? And that's going to give me a better idea for where those shading value spots are. I find it best to err on the side of a lighter value than you think you need, and that way you can always darken it up later, but it's a lot more difficult and aggravating to have to try and lighten something up after the fact. You'll also notice that as I go, I'm erasing back that grid to be lighter, especially whenever I have areas of lighter value. This way I won't have the grid showing up as easily in my final drawing. I'm also working from top to bottom and from left to right. This way, because I'm right-handed, I won't have my hand dragging through any of the graphite and smearing the values, where I've taken careful time to make sure that everything is where it needs to be. If you're left-handed, I would suggest doing the opposite, still going top to bottom, but moving from the right side of your image towards the left. That'll make it so that way you don't smear. Continue this process across the whole image until you're finished. It's also a good idea to try and pay as close attention as you can to values and details as possible, and that's going to help you have a more successful drawing in the end. I also suggest avoiding the temptation to throw your 100% values in first. Again, it's always easier to build up your values, and that way you don't go too far too quickly, and you don't have extra graphite laying around on your paper to get smeared easily.